The Persona 3 protagonist, otherwise known as Makoto Yuki as I will call him in this video, is a fascinating character and is among a lot of people's favorite Persona characters list, and this is for a good reason. There's a lot more than meets the eye with him, and his character arc is one of the best in the series in my opinion. In this video, I'll be going over his growth as a character, and also giving additional context by going in detail about the mythology and reasoning of his personas as well. I would also like to mention that I'll be referring to both the movies and the game since I think they both do a good job of developing him as a character. I don't want to take any more of your time, so let's go ahead and get into the background of Makoto and learn more about him. Starting from the very beginning, Persona 3 setting is a place called Iwatodai City, and Makoto is an 11th grader transferring to a school called Gekkoukan High here. A decade prior to the start of the game, Makoto's parents passed away on Moonlight Bridge in Port Island, which led him to become apathetic about life. This event traumatized him, and from that point onward, he had little care about life or death. Ironically, this is beneficial in terms of his prowess in combat, but I'll get to that in due time. From that point forward, he had to bounce between schools and relatives, so he never had a chance to get comfortable or make solid connections. Not that he had much of a desire at this point anyways. In terms of personality, Makoto is a mostly careless and reserved individual, and gives off a cold demeanor. He doesn't make many choices on his own accord simply due to a lack of care or will. This doesn't mean he's completely heartless, however. He does have a care for others, just not for himself. Near the beginning of the first movie, Makoto as a child is described as always very polite to his neighbors and reportedly had a very good upbringing. And it also says that after the incident with his parents, his personality completely changed, which would add more context to my previous statement. You can infer a decent amount from his character design alone. He covers his face with his dark hair, he has headphones in all the time, and he tends to walk with his hands in his pockets staring off into space or at the ground, and you'd be hard pressed to see him with anything more than a deadpan look on his face. A lot of these qualities exude a sense of solitude, and to an extent sorrow, which would be an accurate description of Makoto as a character at the beginning of the story. Now that we have a basic understanding of his backstory and what he's gone through, we can get into the main plot where things get interesting. Now, I'm not going to describe each and every single date in the game or anything, I'm just going to go over the important things for the sake of time, but the beginning is integral, so I'll be going over a lot here. Makoto on April 7th arrives in the city via train and makes his way to Iwatodai dorm, where he will be residing, and you immediately get a sense of how careless he truly is. All of a sudden the city is grim, there are caskets and blood surrounding him as he walks, and he doesn't bat an eye. This is known as the Dark Hour, but this is a foreign concept at this point in the story. As the player, we know something is wrong, and obviously Makoto sees what we are seeing since the story is told through his eyes, but there's no response. It's unsettling and it sets up the narrative well. Things don't get any less weird once he arrives at the dorm though, since there's a kid with pale skin and an outfit resembling a prisoner's uniform. We know this figure as Pharos, and he's deeply interconnected to Makoto's journey. His prisoner uniform is likely due to the fact that he's trapped within Makoto. Throughout the game we learn more about him and his connection to Makoto, and he is essentially death and exists to bring upon the fall. Pharos is trapped within him because of a fight between Death and Aigis a decade prior, and Aigis ends up sealing him within Makoto since she didn't have the power to defeat him. This was the cause of the death of Makoto's parents, but he wouldn't be aware of any of this until later in the story. He signs a contract at the request of Pharos, which states, "Time never waits, it delivers all equally to the same end. I hereby agree to the statement above, and I chooseth this fate of mine own free will." And boy, was that damn contract ever accurate. Anyway, Makoto signs it, and Pharos says to him,
確かに。時はすべてのものに結末を運んでくる。たとえ耳と目を塞いでいてもね。
and with that, the journey begins. The very next day after school and meeting a fellow classmate named Junpei, Makoto goes to sleep and is introduced to the Velvet Room, Igor, and Elizabeth for the first time. His signing of the contract is granted him access, and this place allows him to make use of his soon-to-come power of Persona. On April 9th, Makoto walks home with Junpei, and in the movie he even helps out Fuka pick up her belongings after being picked on. The following night is where things get really interesting though. During the Dark Hour, shadows begin an attack on the dorm, and since Makoto bears the potential of the power of Persona, he's fully conscious and stable. We already know this because of the way he acted during the move-in though. Since shadows are attacking the dorm, Yukari and Makoto make an attempt to flee, and this demonstrates what I mentioned before about him not caring about life and death and not having a will. As they are fleeing, Yukari is panicking, but Makoto does not care about the situation at all. He even takes a minute to stop and take a look outside at the moon, and this leads to an important back and forth.
好きだ。
何やってるの？命かかってるんだよ。死にたいの？
どうでもいい。死ぬってそんなに怖いこと？
何？それ。
This difference between Makoto and Yukari is very important. Once they get to the roof, the shadows make their way to attack her, but she can't pull the trigger of her evoker because her fear of death holds back the resolve to pull the trigger and summon the persona. Now once Yukari gets attacked and is in danger, we get to see Makoto's true colors. For some context, the whole point of the Dark Hour is to attack humans and give them what is known as apathy syndrome in-game. It basically renders the subject unresponsive and vegetative because of the level of apathy it inflicts. So why do they not go after Makoto? Well, it's because he already doesn't care about life or death. He may not be exactly vegetative, but he shares the same lack of care for life and death as the victims of apathy syndrome at this point in the story, so they have no reason to go after him at this moment. But there's a key difference between Makoto and these victims. As said before, he may not care about himself, but he still has a moral compass and cares for others. When he sees Yukari struggling on the ground about to be killed by shadows, he's visibly distraught, which is the first time we see real emotion on his face, really. With the evoker Yukari failed to use at his feet, he without hesitation and even a smile on his face, as well as a small push from Pharaoh's, pulls the trigger and summons his new power. Once his persona, Orpheus, is summoned, the shadows change their attitude toward him and move into attack. He fights back and blows through his stamina in no time. Or Psyche in this case. But then something even more peculiar happens. The bizarre looking persona with coffins and a sword tears Orpheus apart, and this persona defeats the shadow with little to no effort. This persona is of course Thanatos, and after defeating the shadow it transforms back to Orpheus, at which point Makoto passes out from exhaustion. Now there's a lot I want to explain, so let's start with the backstory of Orpheus in mythology. Orpheus is a very popular figure in Greek mythology with the ability to charm all living things and stones through the power of music, and he plays this music with a lyre. The design of Orpheus in Persona 3 has a lyre for this reason, and is referred to as the Master of Strings. His face also mimics that of Makoto 1-to-1 as well. His power to charm all things is representative of Makoto's power to forge social links with his fellow classmates and various adults throughout the city. Despite being a reserved person, he manages to change the trajectory of many people's lives, and alongside the power of the wild card, it strengthens him and his ability. There are a few stories regarding Orpheus, but I'm going to go over just a couple. The first one is regarding his adventures as an Argonaut in the story Argonautica written by Apollonius Rhodius. I hope that's how you pronounce that anyway. During this adventure, Orpheus and the other Argonauts are on an adventure to retrieve the Golden Fleece, and without him, the journey never could have been accomplished. The journey itself isn't the main focus at this point, but what is important is that along the way the crew came across sirens, which are figures that sing beautiful songs that send sailors to their imminent doom. Orpheus, with the power of his lyre, was able to drown out the music with his own, which saved everyone. This is demonstrated countless times throughout the game. Due to Makoto's power of the wild card, he is a powerful ally, and is able to save his friends several times over, and even the whole world with power that no one can match, and this will be elaborated on several times moving forward. The other important story is the death of his wife Eurydice, and his journey to the underworld to save her. Eurydice on their wedding day died after falling into a pit of snakes, and once Orpheus discovered her body, he played sad and mournful songs on his lyre that made even gods cry. Not too long after, Orpheus traveled to the underworld in an attempt to save her. The chances of him ever returning were an all-time low, but returning with his wife was an even more unlikely task. Despite this, he pushed forward anyway, and once he reached Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of the underworld respectively, he played music so beautiful it softened even their hearts. Orpheus in Persona 3 is a persona belonging to the Full Arcana, and the Full Arcana represents the beginning and end of a journey as well as limitless potential. This represents Orpheus's resolve to go upon the expedition to the underworld for Eurydice despite the odds he was up against, which is also representative of Makoto's journey at large. Surprisingly, they allowed Eurydice and Orpheus to return to the overworld under the condition that Orpheus could not look back for her until they returned. All went well, but as soon as he stepped foot into the overworld, he looked back at Eurydice, not realizing she had not stepped across the boundary yet, and this caused her to disappear forever. In regards to Makoto, I like to think of this part of the legend as being representative of the tragic passing of his parents. There are a few legends that describe his death, but the one I'll state here is regarding his death at the hands of Dionysus Maynats. In the later years of his life, due to what he saw in the underworld, he began to detest the gods bar Apollo, who gave him his lyre. One morning, he traveled to the top of a mountain to pray to Apollo, but once he reached the top, he was torn apart by the Maenads for not worshipping him. Okay, so we got some information about Orpheus and Makoto, but it really begs the question, what's the significance of Thanatos appearing and tearing Orpheus to shreds? Why did this happen? Well, that leads me to my next point. As mentioned before, Pharos, who is sealed inside of Makoto, is essentially death incarnate. And just what is Thanatos in Greek mythology? The personification of death. So Makoto's two main personas at this point are very different from each other. Even after Pharos is separated from Makoto in the form of Ryoji and Nyx, he retains Thanatos within his repertoire. Thanatos is a guide of death and is the son of Nyx, who is the final boss of the game. Thanatos tearing Orpheus to shreds is akin to his actual death in mythology, where he was torn to shreds there as well for not worshipping and obeying Dionysus. And in the context of Persona 3, it could be seen as going against death in the fall from that point onward. That's how I like to view it anyway. Another interesting fact about Thanatos is that he was tricked by Sisyphus and shackled inside of Tartarus, which in Greek mythology is a deep dungeon of torment for the wicked and is a place for judgment after death. Tartarus is the main dungeon of the game, and Makoto alongside Cease make their way toward the top as the game progresses, ultimately leading them to the final encounter with Death or Nyx. As you can see, everything is very interconnected with each other, and if you are aware of the mythology of all these figures and locations, you can piece together a lot of things even this early on in the game. So now that we finally have a lot more context on Orpheus and Thanatos, we can return to the rooftop where Makoto passed out. Yeah, he's just been taking a nap while I rambled on, but don't worry. His passing out and depleted psyche does go back to something I wanted to talk about near the start, and that's the fact that his lack of self-preservation and care at the beginning is beneficial to him in combat. Since he doesn't fear death, he has no issues putting himself into these dangerous situations, and he also doesn't care to go all out and exert everything he has. Summoning a persona takes a lot of mental and physical energy, and despite that, he does it with prowess in no time. Also due to his lack of care or will to make decisions for himself, anytime he's told to do something, he does it. When they ask him to join Cease and fight the shadows, he does it. He's asked to be the leader of the group because of his wildcard ability? Sure, no problem. Whether it be battle or mundane tasks, if he's told to do something, he's rushing in head first with no hesitation. This aspect of him is not all well though, obviously. It makes the members of the party worried, angry, and even jealous at times. The thing is, while Makoto does care for others, he doesn't understand a lot of things about people. He doesn't quite understand why people should care and why people may do the things they do or say the things they say. His understandings of things is to take the words and actions of people literally because he doesn't understand the complexity of human emotions and feelings at this point. In the movies, shortly after joining Cease, he has a conversation with Fuka, and this kind of represents what I'm talking about.
なんでどうでもよくない？どうでもいいって言われたろ。
だって友達だから。そのことを謝りたいのになかなか言い出せなくて、多分許してもらえないのが怖いんだと思う。
怖い？
怖いよ。大切な友達だもん。だからどうでもいいはずないの。
During this stage of the narrative, he doesn't understand what true bonds are, but it's still clear he's willing to put in some amount of effort to hear it out. By the time the next full moon operation comes around, where they must defeat shadows of certain arcana in an attempt to defeat the Dark Hour, you can already see his growth as a character a little bit. At the start of the operation, he's still just following orders, and he's even willing to let Junpei venture out on his own because he doesn't understand the complexity of his character. But when he sees him rush into danger, he has flashbacks to the incident with his parents. At this point, he does something completely out of character. He makes use of his power of the wild card and saves Junpei and says to him,
背中は預けた。かっこつけやがって。
at which point is his first glimpse of understanding bonds and friendship. And this power of friendship and camaraderie gives them the strength needed to defeat the shadow and stop the train from crashing. Cause that was also going to happen, I should have mentioned that. Makoto rushing in blindly and doing something random in an attempt to stop the train is also yet another example of his fearlessness, but I don't think any more examples of that will be necessary at this point. I feel like we all get that. But what is important is that Yukari is still not completely satisfied with him, and that'll be important soon. From this point onward in the story, Makoto begins forging bonds with everyone in the school and around town. He can join clubs and do all kinds of things. And I'm not going to go over any of the social links, but just keep in mind that throughout the rest of the game, he is getting closer with people, and this is strengthening him and his power of the wild card as a result. After a little bit of time, Fuka, the girl Makoto has seen around and talked to a couple times at this point, has gone missing. They go in search of information about what happened, which leads them to the person that bullied her, Natsuki. Now, I'd like to mention that I'm basing this off the events that happened in the movie because I really like the way it's written and portrayed in that adaptation. In the meeting after the talk with Natsuki, they all come to an agreement to infiltrate Tartarus and save Fuka. But then there's an important thing Yukari says here.
安全を保証はできないが、それでも頼む。
わかりました。
本当に分かってるの？私は真田先輩みたいに立派な決意みたいなのないけど、それでも自分の力で助けられる人がいるなら助けたいって思う。山岸さんのことも助けてあげたい。どうでもいいくせに頼まれたから戦うだけなら来ないで。そういうのすっごくイライラする。
わかった。
怖いの。このままじゃ結城くん、自分では何も考えないまま戦って、それでいつか遠くへ行っちゃいそうで。
Now, was Yukari somewhat harsh with what she said? Of course she was, yeah. But was she wrong? No, not really. She had valid reasons for feeling the way she did. Makoto after that stays at the dorm and protects Natsuki, and at this point the most important moment in Makoto's character arc occurs. He tells Natsuki about the things Fuka had previously said about her, and it makes her regret the things she did. Makoto doesn't really do a good job at protecting her, and I guess you could say this is because he wasn't directly told to keep that close of an eye on her, so yeah. But what happens is that Pharos appears and gives Makoto the message that if he doesn't intervene and help his friends in Tartarus, they're all gonna die. Again, at the thought of his parents, he can't bear to see any more people in his life die in the same vein. Just like Orpheus from the mythology, he rushes right into the underworld to save the ones he holds dear despite the odds. And with the strength of will, the wild card, and his newfound resolve, he's able to make a difference in the tides of battle. Ultimately though, even he gets overpowered. Mitsuru and the others tell him to flee with Fuka and Natsuki, who is also in Tartarus at this moment. But he refuses. For the first time, he proves that he isn't devoid of life and will, and he finally takes his life into his own hands and does something not because he was told, but because it's what he believes is right. He doesn't fight because of a lack of self-preservation, he fights to save his friends. It may have taken drastic circumstances, but he now understands why people should care about others, and with this newly developed, perfect synergy between himself and his comrades, they're able to overthrow the shadows together and successfully complete the operation. Truly a worthy moment of the charming master of strings and his allies. Once they and Fuka return to school afterward, Natsuki comes to Fuka with a much more friendly attitude, showing she's even changed from how she acted before, and this draws out something crazy from Makoto. An actual smile. His growth from the start to now is amazing. He's still not perfect by any means, but he's beginning to understand things much better, and he's finding enjoyment and fulfillment out of his life for the first time in a decade. It's heartwarming to say the least. At this point, we're going to speed up a little bit in the video. As things progress from that point onward, they defeat more shadows, and eventually they go on a trip to the beach because every JRPG in anime has to have that. Makoto and everyone else hang out and have a good time, and this leads to a couple things. Yukari learns that allegedly, her dad was to blame for the shadows, and she runs off during the dark hour alone, at which point Makoto follows her to be there for her. Although he was told to do so, I'd like to believe he probably would have gone anyway. The conversation they have is heartfelt. Yukari vents out her frustrations, and Makoto tries to comfort her in his own way.
竹場には意味なくても俺にはあったよ。竹場やみんなと一緒にいると飽きない。悪くないって思う。こういうの楽しいって言うのかな。
What he says is pretty interesting and something to keep in mind. Despite how awful the Dark Hour is and how they're trying to get rid of it, he has a fondness for it since it's what has gotten him to the point he's at now, which is a much better spot now that he has friends that he cares for. I can't even really blame him for it either, because if I were in his shoes, I'd probably feel the same way. and this looming feeling is something that will follow him as time progresses. Not too long after this conversation, shadows come and attack them, but they don't have their evokers on them, so they can't fight back. Aigis comes out of nowhere and takes out the threats with finesse, and says,
ようやく見つけた。あなたをずっと探していました。私の一番の大切はあなたのそばにいることであります。
which is pretty crazy considering she's the reason Makoto was there in the first place, since she, sealed death inside of him, but she has no memory of this at this point, and Makoto is none the wiser to it as well. It's just a wild thing to think about in retrospect, really, and it's just another example of everything tying together in the big picture. What I said just a minute ago about his feeling for the Dark Hour following him is already starting to show though. Once it's revealed there are allegedly only 6 more shadows for them to defeat to have the Dark Hour disappear, he's clearly dissatisfied and worried. He doesn't want the Dark Hour to end because he wants to have this bond and routine with the others to last forever. Ironically, his initial strength has now turned into a weakness. He can't bring himself to go all out against the shadows because he's afraid of it all being over. A lot of things happen from this point onward. They encounter a rival group of Persona users by the name of Strega, they defeat more of the shadows that will supposedly end the Dark Hour, and they enjoy their time together. Now let's fast forward to the date October 4th, which is yet another full moon. Again, the way this part of the story is told is much different in the game than it is the movie, but I do like the movie's way a bit better. What can I say, they did a good job of adapting the story. At this point, the brunt of Makoto's doubt is beginning to affect him more and more. So much so to the point that he can barely find the strength to summon his persona, and his allies are even starting to lose a little bit of faith, but they do still put their trust in him. As we're all probably aware, on October 4th, Shinjiro and Ken are having a not so pleasant meetup while the others are fighting the main shadows. In the game, Makoto and Cease fight them, and then afterward are made aware of what is about to occur. But in the movies, right as they begin fighting, they're all well aware of what's happening, but they can't do anything about it until they defeat the shadows, and they're no small threat. Everyone begins fighting desperately, but in the worst possible time, Makoto's resolve fails him. He hesitates to attack the Fortune persona, and only after a lot of pushing from Akihiko and Mitsuru is he able to force himself to get the job done. Immediately, they all rush to Ken and Shinji's location, where they find out they were too late. Shinji sacrificed himself to save Ken from Strega, and everyone collectively despairs. They may have been able to defeat the shadows, but there was a price to pay. Again, a lot of things happen after this. With the death of Shinji, the eventual betrayal of Cease chairman who sought to bring upon the fall, Pharaoh's disappearing, and the death of Mitsuru's father, Makoto regrets back to a shell of himself. He blames himself for a lot of what happened, and even though he still understands why to care for others, and he still does, his fear of losing the ones he loves makes him push himself away. This is a very common defense mechanism in people who have gone through painful times in their life. And Makoto has suffered a lot in a short and long span of time. They don't want to get hurt, so they feel it's easier to be alone than to risk that chance. Pharaoh even says that to him. What's ironic is that a new face named Ryoji, who of course is Pharaoh's, is the one who helped to drive Makoto out of this. Ryoji isn't aware of his true form and purpose quite yet, so as far as he and anyone else is concerned, he's just an upbeat and optimistic individual. He hangs out with and helps Makoto. They work together, help people around school, and just socialize together. Since Ryoji was inside of Makoto without knowing it, he understands him really well, and he feels a connection toward him, so he's able to ever so slightly chip through the wall he's built around himself. Once Makoto and everyone go on a school trip to Kyoto together, he's still got this wall around him, but it finally gets broken through here. During the night of the first day, Akihiko pulls Makoto to the side for a private chat, and he gives some words of wisdom that will help him see the truth.
守るべき大切なもののない一生に何の意味がある。確かに失うことは辛いさ。そんなこと俺だって分かってる。大切なものは失ってから大切だったと気づく。それでも大切なものが何もない空っぽな人間よりはずっといい。たとえ傷ついたとしてもな。
After he returns to the room, Junpei and Ryoji are as lively as ever and attempt to get him into a better mood. Aigis busts into the room, and after some humorous back and forth between everyone, we get a nice sight.
Makoto-san?
Makoto finally lets down this wall he has placed around himself and lets out a genuine laugh. The first one we see in the whole story. And they make many more great memories on their class trip as well. Well, mostly great memories, but you know, they can't all be winners. Once they return from Kyoto, it's revealed that Chidori has gone missing from the hospital that she's been staying at, and they've been keeping tabs on. So when the dark hour comes, they go look for her. Chidori attacks the group and says something important.
一番怖いのはそれは執着してしまうこと。執着すればなくすのが怖くない。物だって命だって何だって。なのに純平は私にいらない苦しみを持ってきた。
千鳥を失うのが、千鳥と一緒にいらなくなるのが何よりも怖いんだ。だからさ、だから一緒にいられるんじゃねえの。一人じゃ怖いから、なくさないように大事にできるんじゃねえの。
純平。
千鳥。そうか、そうだな。
Makoto, through these words in Chidori, sees himself through a mirror. That's exactly how he felt as well, and all of a sudden one of his biggest enemies doesn't seem so inhumane or bad anymore. Had things been different, it could have been Makoto on the opposite side of the coin in Chidori's position. Unfortunately, things do not end well as Junpei gets shot by Shrega and Chidori sacrifices her life to save Junpei. This awakens Junpei to a newfound power, and amidst all of this, Makoto has another internal dialogue that shows his overcoming of the fear of loss.
人は結局一人でしか生きていけない。違う。つながりなんて持たない方がいい。失った時に傷つくだけだから。
違う。
どんなに大切なものでも消えてしまえば何も残らない。だったら初めから何もいらない。
違う。
何も必要ない。違
う。
何も欲しくない。違う。
俺はつながりから逃げたりしない。
After the last battle with Shrega, where Chidori sacrificed herself, Makoto accepts Ryoji's invitation of friendship, but unfortunately that very same night a tragic truth is revealed. As we know in retrospect, Ryoji is the appraiser of the fall. By defeating the shadows on the full moon nights, they have brought forth death in the fall. Even by pure concept, it's an unfathomable thing. So put yourself in the shoes of Makoto and seize. The exact thing you've been striving to go against has become reality because of you, and the chances of being able to defeat death itself are almost impossible, and all of them know this. Understandably, everyone in the entire group is scared. Knowing when you were going to die and having it be so soon is not a piece of knowledge anyone could take well, especially the fact that it was brought upon by yourself. Everyone handles it differently, but in general, everyone is making their final preparations before they go, or they're drowning in apathy. Makoto is not excluded from this, and since he has the choice to kill Ryoji and forget everything until the fall, he has a very important decision to make. Does he kill Ryoji, or does he face death to the end? The thought of throwing in the towel and killing him obviously creeps through his head more and more as he sees everyone he loves suffering. And hell, I can't even really blame him. This is essentially his biggest fear come to life, and it's going to take some time to find his resolve to overcome such a mental hurdle. C's have until New Year's Eve to make their final decision, and while everyone has their own way of making their decision, Makoto finds his by going back to where it all started. And from here, I'm going to let the man himself take it away.
10年前、あの事故があってから、俺は多分ちゃんと生きてなかった。だけどこの町に来て仲間と過ごして、そうして初めて俺は生きることを始められたんだと思う。
I just gotta say, Makoto's character arc is truly beautiful. It's hard to believe he went from someone who couldn't even begin to understand or imagine being close with people, from someone who couldn't care less about living or dying, to what he is now. An irreplaceable friend that will fight to the very end to live and save everyone. It's poetic, and his character arc isn't even over yet. Once Ryoji comes on December 31st, everyone collectively agrees to let Ryoji live and fight death as hard as they can. When Makoto and him are in private, he tells him he's not going to kill him, and he's actually shocked at this. He may have his memories of what he is back, but that doesn't change the fact that he does still care for him. The memories they made together were real, and they both cherished him greatly. So he tries to convince him, but Makoto's mind is made up. He's going to fight to save the world and his friends. When they return to the others stating what choice Makoto made, Aigis desperately tries to kill Ryoji, and she does this because she doesn't want to see anyone suffer anymore. She runs out, and Makoto chases after her. Eventually they meet up on the Gekkokan High rooftop, at which point he consoles her, preaching things he never would have thought possible before.
私は感情のない機械ですから。
嘘だ。感情のない機械が怖いなんて感じるのか？
They realize that once they defeat Nyx, they're gonna forget everything about the Dark Hour, but Makoto with a stern determination states that they will regain their memories no matter what. A fitting speech from a charming leader. On the Judgment Day for the final battle against Nyx, everyone goes all out, no holds barred. They're all at max power and ready to fight to the very end. They make their way to the top of Tartarus and fight against Shreka and countless shadows, and in the movie, Makoto fights Nyx head on while everyone fends off the aforementioned foes. He makes use of the wild card to max effect in this battle, summoning personas of many different arcana and strength, but Nyx is just way too strong and overpowers him in no time. Despite that, Makoto continues to fight with stronger and stronger tenacity each time he falls. Eventually, Makoto summons the power of Thanatos, and this is the first time you see him since the very start of the story, the son of death rebelling against the father of death. Ironically, with the personification and guide of death in his hands, Makoto puts a real fight against Nyx and even impresses him. Even with this power though, Makoto is unable to defeat Nyx. The members of Cease defeat Shreka and reunite with Makoto at the top of Tartarus, but it's too late. The fall begins. Once this occurs, the end of the world is imminent. A powerful force takes the group off their feet, and countless shadows come rushing toward them. Defenseless, they all get overpowered, and in this moment, Makoto awakens to his ultimate power.
たどり着いてしまったんだね、君は。命の答えに。何者にも代え難いものを君は見つけた。自分のすべてを投げ打ってでも守りたいものを。答えにたどり着いた君は奇跡を手にする資格を得た。それはどんな不可能をも可能にする力だ。でも君は本当にそれでいいのかい？わかった。
By finding his answer to life and making the ultimate decision, he fuses his two main personas, Orpheus and Thanatos, to create his ultimate persona, the Messiah. By combining the Master of Strength's charming and beautiful power and the Son of Death into one, he has created the potential for a miracle to occur. Orpheus' bravery to travel into the underworld for the one he loved, his power to charm all things, and Thanatos' role as a god of death, a being that hated mortals and gods. Such differing powers, yet when put together, bring out an immeasurable potential. The Messiah is a savior or liberator of a group of people, and in many cases is the one that dies for the sake of others. Knowing this, it's clear to see where Makoto's heart leads him. The Messiah persona even resembles Makoto one-to-one just like Orpheus did. With this new power, Makoto throws away his evoker and makes his way to the top towards Nyx alone. He says one final thing before he heads off.
生きろ。生きろ。
生きなさい。
It's poetic that despite Aigis being the reason Makoto is where he is today, he doesn't harbor any ill will or disdain towards her. In fact, he wouldn't have it any other way. Aigis had a hard decision to make, and even though the decision resulted in a lot of sorrow for Makoto, it led him to meeting the ones he loves, and for their sake he's gonna make the ultimate sacrifice. Amazingly, he awakens to the power of the Universe Arcana. Makoto is the only character in the entire franchise to ever accomplish this feat, demonstrating just how powerful his resolve and strength were. As Makoto faces down Nyx by himself, he is far from being alone. No amount of force or resistance can hold him back. With the power of the Universe Arcana brought forth by the bonds he's forged thus far, and the ability to bring upon the ultimate end, or a new beginning, he fulfills his contract with no regrets. After defeating Nyx, the rest of Cease are transported to a beautiful space, but Makoto's nowhere to be found. Everyone despairs for a moment at the thought of him being gone, but he does fulfill his promise to return. The Dark Hour ends, and just as they expected, they all lose their memories. Well, besides Makoto and Aigis anyway. They live their lives normally up to the promised day as if nothing had happened. Makoto, a couple days before the date they agreed on, sees all of the ones he holds dear one last time. On March 5th, during the Gekkoukan graduation ceremony, he struggles to make his way to the rooftop, where Aigis is waiting for him. They have a beautiful conversation, and as Makoto begins to feel sleepy, he sees his friends for the final time, running toward him, happy, excited to see him, and calling out his name. With a smile on his face, knowing he's made the correct choice, he closes his eyes for the final time as a beautiful sun beams down on him. I mean, holy shit. No matter how many times I see that ending and no matter what adaptation it is, movie, game, manga, you name it, it hits me so hard I can't even begin to tell you. Makoto's death at the end is something I could not believe was happening as I beat the game for the first time. Going from not caring about life or death and having no connections to what he was at the end of the game is just a masterpiece, for lack of better words. Persona 3 may not be a perfect story in any of the adaptations, but tell me, what the hell is? The last thing I have to mention before we get into the summary is the answer. Although Makoto is dead and his character arc is over, it's revealed what really happened to him. During the final battle against Nyx, Makoto used his power to seal Nyx, and this required him to give up his soul to do so. You can see Makoto in the form of a stone statue holding the door that holds Nyx. This is his fate for the rest of eternity, yet despite that he had no regrets about what he did. In fact, he never wanted to come back to life, knowing the consequences of what would happen as a result. He knows his friends will live fulfilling lives, so he had no problem making the decision. With Makoto's journey in life now complete, there's so much to think about once the game is over. What's my answer to life? What is the answer to life for the rest of Cease? What are the things in my life that I want to live for? All of these questions and more stem from the fact that no matter how you consume the story, the way Makoto is handled as a character plays the biggest role in delivering us to these said questions, and that's a sign he was pretty damn well written, I'd like to argue. The amount of care and thought that went into his design is amazing. The choice of Orpheus and Thanatos being his two personas, and the thought of those two unlikely pairings being the one to create the Messiah? I mean, come on, bro, that's just crazy in a great way. I can't say this game changed my life or anything, but I can say that it made me think about things in a bit of a different light after I had beaten it. I felt like I could appreciate a little bit more in my life, and I am thankful to this game and the Persona series at large for that. Again, I just want to emphasize his growth as a character one more time. He goes from having the personification of death inside of him, not caring for life or death, and having no true friends to evolving said personification of death to overthrow death itself for the sake of wanting to live and protect those he cares for. Like seriously, it's just insane how far he came as a person. For all the ups and downs he had, he found his answer to life and gave up his life for it. It's truly superb, and it's a character arc that's sure to hit hard every time. For all the times Makoto fell, he got back up, and that's a real inspiration. Enough about my opinion though, I want to know what you all think. What do you think about Persona 3, Makoto, and life? Did you like the game? Did you enjoy Makoto as the protagonist? Did this game change your outlook on life at all? I want to get real deep in the comments, and I want to hear what you have to say, so I'm going to reply to every single comment on this video. With all of this said, Makoto is a goated character and I love him, and I also love y'all. If you feel generous today, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, but don't feel forced to do so. I appreciate you all either way. My name is Yandere Gogeta, and I will see y'all in the next video. Peace out and have a great day.